Every Ukrainian and every citizen of Ukraine should know that his, her moral, material and finally physical existence can be provided only in independent Ukraine. Since ancient times, Ukraine is known for its wealth of nature. Ukrainian black soil is 30% of world's black soil. In 1550, Lithuanian diplomat Mikhail Litvin wrote, "Kiev's soil is so fertile and easy to work with that it only needs few bulls and one plow for a good harvest." Dnipro is called the river of honey and milk. At the end of 19th century, 90% of the grain exported by Russian Imperia was taken from Ukraine. Ukraine has been the true granary of Europe. In 20th century, communistic and totalitarian government destroyed this granary. Holodomor of 1932-1933, which was artificially created by the Bolshevik regime, killed millions of Aboriginal farmers. The 20th century was the era of Ukraine's struggle for independence. The struggle for independence began during February Revolution in 1917, where the Central Council of the Third and Fourth Universals proclaimed independence of the UNR, Ukrainian National Republic. Under the Bolshevik pressure, UNR government, headed by Simon Petlura in 1920, was forced to leave Ukraine. But the national and liberal struggle was not over. The 24th of August 1991 was the culmination of the struggle for independence. Верховна Rada of Ukraine adopted the Declaration of Independence, while in the 1st of December 1991, 92% of Ukrainians voted for independence of Ukraine at the national referendum. The publication of the severe truth about the genocide of 1932-1933 in Ukraine was possible only in an independent country. The powerful Ukrainian elite and nationally conscious farmers were considered by Moscow as a real threat for the Bolshevik regime. Genocide began in 1928 with the curtailment of Ukrainization and new economic policy. In 1929, fabricated court trials, which destroyed the national elite, took place. There were substituting stories and adjustment of the Ukrainian language to Russian. Several thousand teachers of Ukrainian language, priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and 100 kobzars were convicted and shot by authorities. Still, it wasn't enough for this regime. Ukrainian village, the carrier and guardian of national spirit, was to be destroyed. That was when the authorities arranged Holodomor. The authorities of the USSR considered Holodomor as a tool to suppress the national resistance. Regulation of Central Committee's Orgbureau of Bolsheviks on Bread in Ukraine, North Caucasus and the Western region demanded Ukrainization. In fact, it meant persecution of the Ukrainian intelligentsia and the elimination of Ukrainian schools in Kuban. June 22nd, 1933, Italian consul Grideniva informed from Kharkov, nothing will survive out of Ukrainian, except that board needed by the policy of Moscow. Ukrainians had to disappear as a nation. Wealthy owners were the foundation of agriculture in Ukraine. Regime eliminated the best farms intentionally. Hardworking, diligent, caring, and that's why wealthy owners were disrespectively called kulaks. The communist regime was physically destroying them. A lot of destroyed kulaks were deported to the north, the Urals and Siberia. About 285,000 families were forcibly transferred outside Ukraine. Forced collectivization, launched in 1928, led to catastrophic harvest fall. It destroyed the Ukrainian traditional structure of agriculture. In July 1932, unrealistic plan for grain procurements was proved to Ukraine. The failure of this plan gave authorities formal basis for repressions. Bolshevik regime removed all food supplies from the peasants. People were starving. People were looking for salvation. The 7th of August 1932, the Central National Committee and the Council of National Commissars of the USSR adopted a resolution on the protection of property of state entrepreneur, kolkhoz and cooperatives, also the resolution on the strengthening of public and socialist ownership. Theft of farm property, in accordance with this resolution, was punishable by shootings, and for incentive circumstances, imprisonment for 10 years minimum. In the nation's memory, this decree remained as Law on 5 Spikelets. Autumn 1932. To Ukraine arrived Grain Procurement Commission from Moscow, headed by Molotov. In December 1932, Central Committee of the Orgbureau of Bolsheviks made Ukrainian leadership to transform all available grain and even planting material from Ukrainian villages. There was ramage all over villages. The last was taken away from peasants. Terrible blacklists is the tragedy of the Ukrainian nation. Starting November 1932, Kaganovich provided blacklists on Kuban, in districts populated by Ukrainians. December the 6th, 1932, 6 Ukrainian villages were indicatively put on the blacklists by the Central Committee of the Orgbureau and Nations Commissar Committee of the USSR. After that, the blacklists regime was set massively. The 1st of January 1933, a telegram by Stalin to Ukrainian peasants was announced. It contained threats of severe penalties in case of grain concealment. Since then, almost entire Ukraine appeared to be in the blacklist. Blacklisting of the village meant surrounding of the village by armed squads, removal of all the reserves, prohibition of sales and importing or exporting of any kind of goods. Being on the blacklist actually meant death penalty to the village. January 22nd, 1933, the instruction of Council of Commissars of the USSR and Orgbureau, signed by Stalin and Molotov, prohibited departure of the peasants from Kuban and Ukraine. Those who had time to get out were arrested and forced to return back to Ukraine. Over 186,000 Ukrainians were imprisoned. Officials kept the fact of Holodomor a secret. There were no official mentioning about this tragedy. In 1937, a census took place. Population reducing was classified as secret, and the leaders of statistics departments were repressed. Information about the Holodomor remained confident in the Soviet Union until 1987. During the years of Holodomor, homelessness among children reached its highest point. Tens of thousands of kids were just rambling around in the cities trying to find some food. In May 1933, 12,000 orphans were picked from the streets of Kharkov city. Quotation from the protocol of those times: "There are no healthy children. Every single one is anemic, has a scariferous, purulent inflammation of ears and other diseases." Orphanages where homeless kids were taken were organized in the cities and towns. They were children of the starving, shot and deported to Siberia parents. Those kids were told that their parents were criminals, money grumbles, and nationalists, and that they were to be abandoned. New surnames were given to youngest children. Holodomor was aimed at the annihilation of Ukrainian people. This is evidenced by census data of 1926 and 1937. The number of Ukrainians in the USSR reduced from 31,200,000 people to 26,400,000 people. Average annual mortality in 1933 was 6.1 times exceeded. Honoring the memory of the Holodomor in 1932-1933 is our sacred duty to the generation which survived from that awful crime of the Soviet power and to the further generations that have to know their past. In 2008, the National Book of Memory of Victims of Holodomor in 1932-1933 was published. It consists of more than 23,000 pages. Thousands of experts, scientists, and archivists were brought to work. The Book of Memory was created in regions that suffered the most: Vinnytsia, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Zhytomyr, Kirovograd, Lugansk, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Sumy, Kharkov, Kherson, Khmelnytsk, Cherkasy, Chernihiv, and the Kiev city. The main section of the Book of Memory is martyrology, the lists of killed people. The law of Ukraine about Holodomor 1932-1933 in Ukraine, according to the first article, has determined Holodomor as the genocide of Ukrainian nation.